Leeds, Yorkshire, Europe, the world, the universe, the multiverse. Writing on Air.
Listening to Writing on Air. Thank you to everyone who's joined us live in the studio. We've just heard from Ruth and Len, Too Old, which will be available for catch-up very soon. But for now, we are going to be listening to a discussion with the Written Off Publishing founder Rebecca Kenny and Charlie Parker, speaking about recovery after major physical trauma. This is The Poet Who Broke Her Back. Please enjoy. Thank you very much.
Your love is like a studded leather headlock. Your kiss, it could put creases in the rain. You're rarer than a can of dandelion and burdock. And those other girls are just post-mix lemon.
Hello everybody and welcome to Chapel FM Writing on Air Festival. I'm your host Charlie Parker, and today we are coming towards the cusp of the end of the year. November's slowly eking our way into December. Autumn has long gone and winter is upon us. The days are shorter, nights are longer, but we no longer see the sun on our skin as much. I personally believe an important mantra as I'm getting older, all of 30 years that I am, is that what lives and what must be alive and thrive, something must also die. Rebirth, so to speak. For any idea, change or new starts, there must be the end of something else. To recover, we must accept defeat in some way, that we need help too. To rebuild, we must show the resilience to start again. My guest today to talk about recovery and rebuilding and writing in the face of trauma is a poet in their own right, currently holding a copy of their own Crash and Learn, and the founder of Written Off Publishing, Rebecca Kenny. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm doing well considering the weather.
Yeah, today's not been so bad, to be fair.
No, it's quite clement for the north.
Yeah, for the north. Well, we'll start off just with I think quite a simple question, but could get quite deep. You were drawn to poetry from your crash. Tell us all about that.
So my original career, I was a teacher. I taught secondary English for 18 years. And on October the 1st, 2021, I got into my car, as I did every single morning, with my cup of coffee and was going to work, as I do. And as I was passing through Lydiate on my way from Southport to Liverpool, I hit a patch of oil on the road and my car skidded out of control and I was T-boned by, of all the cars, a yellow Fiat Punto, which hit me right in the side, and I broke my neck, my back, my pelvis, my sternum, and my sacrum, 11 bones in total. I was taken to Aintree Major Trauma Centre, and it was during the pandemic, so I wasn't allowed any visitors. But by some miracle, my mobile phone and its associated internet connection had survived the crash in a lot better condition than I. And when I was in the hospital, recovering from my injuries, the poetry community that I'd only recently tentatively begun to be a part of really came out to support me while I was in that really terrible position. So I couldn't walk, I couldn't really move, I had a catheter, I was completely bedbound, and the outpouring of support from essentially what were total strangers who came into my inbox and said, do you want to just sit and write something, just to process what's happened, was incredible. And we basically spent the next 2 weeks that I was in the trauma centre composing poetry. People would send me song lyrics to write off of and prompts, and the people in the hospital would give me little things to write about. There was this lady called Barbara who always brought me my dinner. She would always give me things to write about. And off of the back of that, we put all of the poems that we wrote together into a little pamphlet, which was called The Poet Who Broke Her Back, which is what this show's named after. And off of the back of that, and the success that we had with that, raising money for Aintree Major Trauma Centre, I decided to write my own collection of poetry. And then the rest, as they say, is just history, really. It kind of snowballed from there. It started with my collection, and now we've got this amazing community-based project with over 30 writers, and I feel very proud to say that that's something that came out of something so horrendous and so traumatic, and I feel like I've really made something good out of something terrible there.
What was it about poetry specifically that you were drawn to? Was it something that essentially found you, essentially, or were you a poet beforehand, or would you have considered, say, short stories to process anything? As an example.
I love poetry. Like I said, I was a secondary English teacher, and one of the things that I really disliked about education and poetry is how flat poetry is in the education sphere. I find that children are expected to read and love poetry that isn't geared towards their personal life experiences. They're expected to read and love poetry and memorize poetry that isn't necessarily speaking to them in any way. But one thing that I found when I was teaching was if you were able to find a piece of poetry that spoke to a part of somebody's lived experience so that they felt seen, it's a really easy way to get them to care about creativity and art. And personally, for me, I am really bad at keeping to word limits. So if I try and write a short story, it ends up being a novella, and none of it is any good. Whereas with poetry, what I find is it's a snapshot of a moment that you can capture and hold and mold it into something and create something beautiful. And then you can kind of just let it go and let it go into the air. And then it's there for somebody else to grab hold of and say, do you know what? In that moment there, I feel like you've seen something in me. And then hopefully they go off and do the same. And I just feel like for me, that's a real gift of poetry, that you can share a really intimate moment with someone that you've never even met, just because they've had the same experience as you and captured it in that little snapshot moment.
I always tend to find myself that when it comes to poetry that a lesson I was taught in one of my college classes before I went to university for it was that quite literally, if you take song lyrics, take the music away, the poetry is there, and we all care and can remember our favourite song lyrics, but not many will remember our favourite poems in the same way. I think that has that same kind of feeling, like you feel so intimate. And also when, say, like a family member passes away, or you feel extremely emotional in some regard, poetry seems to be the first thing perhaps that comes up, like these, for example, the famous poems down the years of, say, Rudyard Kipling's If. Also, these things that just seem to always knock about in the consciousness there under moments of extreme emotion. So you'd say the crash was the beginning of your poetry career? Was it something that you consciously thought about beforehand?
It was the first time that I'd really believed in myself enough to properly put poetry out there. And I think what was interesting is I come from a background that's quite traumatic anyway, but I never really validated that in myself. And it took having that major traumatic accident for me to go, actually, I have been through quite a lot of stuff, and I have got quite a lot of things that I want to get out now. And it was almost like I'd already dipped into poetry prior to the crash, and I'd done one show in Altrincham in the woods where we'd done this lovely outdoor poetry event. But I don't know if I'd have ever done another show after that. I loved that show that I did, but I didn't feel confident enough to share my words. But then, weirdly, going through that huge crash and having that horrendous thing happen to me and seeing that amazing outpouring of community, it was almost like the poetry took second. It came second to the community aspect of it, and the fact that there's something about poetry that I don't really see in other creative writing circles, in that people band together through this shared experience, and they value each other so passionately. And it goes both ways. There's a lot of drama in the poetry scene, but also, you know, we are all kind of commonly bonded over those experiences, and we understand each other and we get each other. And I think that was, for me, the accident almost kept me in poetry, where I may have just stepped away because I didn't have that confidence prior to it, which I guess is a positive thing to come out of it.
How often do you look at your form when it comes to writing the poems? We'll get on to your first your first performance poem in after this question, I think. But I'm thinking more towards when you came around to writing your first poems and the themes you were writing about. There was a lot of process, of course. And did you find yourself thinking, I'm going to do massive poems because I've got so much to say? Or did you go to the snapshots, like you said before? How did you approach that process?
Do you know, coming off of teaching, I was so tired of teaching poetic form and different kind of and quatrains and stanzas and sonnets. And so I'm very much a free-form poet, and a lot of what I write, it's almost like a brain spew. So I kind of just sit there and it goes bleh, and it comes out of my head and it goes onto the page, and I fiddle around with it a little bit until it makes something coherent. But I'm the worst person to talk about poetry because my process is basically non-existent. It is me just spilling out everything that's in my brain. It's almost like a puzzle. I kind of jiggle it about until it looks good to me. So I'm very much not a form poet. There is rhyme in my poetry. I use a lot of internal rhyme, but a lot of that is me emulating the people that I admire. So, for example, I will read a poem shortly, and a lot of that was inspired by Mark Forster, the B-Bar Barman, who I think is a spectacular poet. And I try and emulate the best parts of the other people that I love to listen to in my own writing and then kind of shape it for myself. So I don't necessarily work to specifics. I don't really do villanelles or burning high buns or things like that. It's quite rare you see me doing an official form of poetry.
I don't even know what they are.
And you don't need to be a poet. That's the joy of it. You don't need to be familiar with all of that technical stuff. If you can just write something on a page and show the passion that you feel, for me, that's poetry, and that's what Written Off is about. It's about throwing away all of those rules and all of those people that say you can only be a poet if you write in this particular way, and say, actually, if you can capture passion on a page, then you're a poet.
I got loads of that at uni. I had like some of the opening creative writing classes, and so especially the very early ones, and they just sit around and so what is poetry then? I'm thinking, well, if you don't know, then I don't really know either. As a lecturer, you've blown it. Are we ready for your first piece?
Yeah, absolutely.
Take it away.
So I wrote my collection, Crash and Learn. It started when I was in the hospital, and then I was recovering at home for a period of about 4 months. And during that time, I was kind of bedbound, having regular anticoagulant injections every day and physio, and so a lot of the collection was written then, and I'm just going to change up what I was going to read, actually, because there's a piece at the beginning that I never read, and actually looking back on it at this point, over 3 years later, it's kind of poignant, and it's not got a title. It comes before the actual book starts, and I wrote this just as I'd come out of hospital. And it's very short. When all of this is over, I will go into the forest by my mother's house in a dress made of organza and with my hair perfectly curled, red lips sparkling in the sunlight, and I will dance beneath the leaves of winter. I will not care that it's cold because I will just be happy to be alive. I will wear my grandmother's ring and stag my tights on thorns and bark, and if I bleed, I'll just make art with the scars as I swig wine from the bottle, and you will take my photograph, and we will hold hands and kiss under the boughs of trees, and all will be okay.
It's lovely, lovely.
I wanted to read that actually because what's interesting is in the years following the crash, shortly after the crash, just to add trauma onto trauma, my grandma, she had cancer and she had a relapse and she died not shortly after the crash. And I was still unable to walk properly when we buried her. But what's beautiful is that I now live in a house. And so I go to that forest 3-4 times a week. And I have a little jig beneath the trees sometimes just to say I'm really glad to be here. And I have got her ring, but my fingers are too fat.
I remember I've got my father's ring, but it only fits my thumb. My hands aren't big enough. So you're in hospital at this point. You've just had just a life-altering event happen to you. What possesses you to start a poetry press?
Like I said, it kind of snowballed. It was one of those things where we were writing together in the hospital and I was putting these poems on Instagram because I had nothing better to do. And all of this community was slowly building around me. And I've never really been in that position where I've had people form a community around me. And it felt like a massive responsibility in many, many ways to be like, oh my goodness, like all these people are kind of counting on me to produce something. But actually, with time, it became clear that it wasn't that. It was that people were genuinely just enjoying the process of unpacking the situation with me and helping me to get through it. And so when I published The Poet Who Broke Her Back, it was a tiny pamphlet of about 12 pages, and it was just the most significant pieces that we'd written. And Steve Mingle, who's a Manchester storyteller and poet, had said to me, you know, you should sell that and raise money for the hospital. And we did, and we raised so much money. We raised like £500, £600. And off of the back of that, when I wrote Crash and Learn, which is a great title, by the way. I'm going to dine out on that forever. I wrote Crash and Learn, and then a lot of my peers were coming to me and saying, well, I've got an idea and I've got a book I'd like to put out, and can you help? And I was in that really unique position where I had a lot of time. I've been a teacher for so long that I had a whole year of sick pay. I had the privilege of time and attention and being able to make these connections with people, and so I decided at that point to utilize that privilege by building a press and offering other people the community that I'd been given at my lowest point, and hopefully give them the same kind of hope that I was given, which meant the world to me.
Have you seen much of the community change over the years? Like, did you find it difficult to get into at first if you perhaps don't class yourself as a poet until you were a poet? Do you see what I mean? Coming from the outside. I think it's a difficult
one, because what we try to do with Written Off is we try and kind of shake off all of those expectations and just say, if you want to be a part of what we do, you will always be welcomed. And so what we do is we operate our community on very much a Skillshare basis and a community sharing of labour. So we don't just share our writing, but we also share our personal skills and our interpersonal skills and our skills from outside of poetry. So, for example, we've got a midwife on our poetry roster who will often offer gynecological advice to people if they need it. We've got psychotherapists. We've got people who are trained educators. We've got people who are disability advocates. And so when we operate as a community, we say to people, you're coming into a community that isn't focused solely on poetry. It's focused on our existence as people, as marginalised people who often don't look marginalised, but for whatever reason have been pushed out of traditional publishing. And we want to kind of challenge that dynamic of poets and say, actually, we're artists and we exist in our own right, but we also exist as this massive community. And I think that's been a real privilege to be a part of. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but...
How have you found that process of starting? It's 3 years now, is it?
It
4
is.
years?
We're coming into our 4th year in February. I genuinely never thought it would last this long. It's been an adventure. It's been a real lesson in who to trust and who to spend time with and who to invest in. And I think I've learned a lot about myself in terms of people wanting to utilize you for a certain purpose. There's been some really tough lessons in terms of working with people who I had considered to be friends, who then you later realise down the line, well, actually, I'm providing something that you want, and I don't like to operate like that. We don't operate as a traditional business. We operate, as I said, as a community. And it's been quite tough sometimes to have those business-focused conversations with people when really what we want to do is foster community and belonging. But through those challenging situations, I've learned a lot about myself as a person. I would have said prior to this that I was very good at interpersonal relationships. But actually what I meant was I was very good within a classroom setting, and I was very good with teenagers and maybe parents of teenagers. But in my own personal life and challenging my own personal conceptions of people and misconceptions of people, I've learned a lot about myself and what I am and am not willing to accept in my own personal space. And I've learned a lot about boundaries, which has been interesting. Especially with people in the publishing industry who often want you to do a lot of work for very little reward, and people in the arts in general. But I've also learned a lot about the actually immense amount of support that's out there, and how much people do want to support you if you've got the guts to go out there and ask for it, which I didn't at the beginning.
Lovely. What I think we'll do now is another one of your poems, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Because we're going to go on to a question answer. Does that please everybody? Question there, Q&A? Yeah. We'll do that, I think.
Cool, okay. So I'm going to read one from towards the end of the book. And before the crash, had a very complicated relationship with my body. I was quite upset about things like gaining weight and looking a certain way, and I always wanted to look at my best, and was always heavily made up, and it's kind of fallen away since the crash. And I think when you go through something like that, or something happens to you that's so traumatic, you kind of realize how arbitrary a lot of it is. And then I started to reflect on my body and what my body has done and how it's kind of protected me. And this piece is called Art. You are a work of art. And my sweet girl, I know it is sometimes really hard to see the patient brushstrokes that went into your heart. But believe me, you have been crafted by some force outside the cosmos. You were forged in fire unlike any other. And I know that you have been tough on yourself, that you sometimes sneered at the way your curves ebb and flow like the tide. I remember how you cried when you felt raw heat between your thighs on a hot day, but that's okay, because you are still learning what it means to appreciate the machinery of your entirety. You are a work of art. You, love, are the finite Rube Goldberg machine, and the layer of dimpled fat on your arse doesn't hide the fat that inside you. Everything moves in synchronicity, like the best love anyone ever made. Your alabaster skin is infused with patience and care. Your eyes shaped by master craftsmen. Who cares that your arms are wider than they once were? And you may be scarred, but that just makes you a badass. Did you not let a doctor slice you open to literally yank out another human before sending you home to heal and mix formula under endless nights with no sleep? And your spine is titanium. So I ask an honest question. How can you be angry at a body that was smashed into at 80 miles an hour and yet did not completely shatter? Right now, you shouldn't be here. Those breaks and strains endured inside a car on a rainy morning were enough to shake the spirit from a person, and yet you are still here, defiant and hungry to continue living. You are a work of art, a smart piece of spiritual engineering. Cogs and spools and wires and gears kick up together with star power and make you glow like fire and powder. Your spirit explodes from you and coats the planet in glitter. And though you might have been stretched to the point of breaking, every single bar of your chest maintained its integrity and protected the air that you breathe hungrily. Your pelvis snapped, but you did not break. You smashed 3 or 4 vertebrae and still stand tall, and that crack in your sternum is small. And anyway, every single fracture and break just adds to the beauty and creates a mosaic. You are a work of art. Look past the opinions of a society dedicated to unattainable standards of beauty and embrace your own face. Touch your own body. Rake fingers through your hair and see you aren't so shoddy. Sit down, observe yourself, drink loads of coffee, and nod appreciatively at your outline. Look into your own heart and try to see yourself for what you really are, a complete, absolute, and delicious work of art.
Oh, that's lovely, lovely.
So I'll bring this roaming mic around, so have a think of any questions. But because I'm holding it, would you like to say
Oh
something?
no, just to kick off some questions anyway.
Oh, you've got
just to
some.
get people going.
Yeah, yeah. I also have one.
Oh
if
no, I
could
can.
get-
Yeah. Oh no,
Charlie, let someone
Sorry.
else.
The phrase that stuck out to me was the privilege of time and attention, and I was thinking about how difficult that is for people to find the time and attention in the cost of living crisis,
Yes.
full-time work, social media. So I just wondered if you had any way of suggesting how people might carve that out for themselves.
I think it's really hard, isn't it? Because a lot of the people that we work with are working multiple jobs, and often working multiple jobs and performing and gigging, and that's really hard. And I always say, you know, when I was at my busiest, I would force myself to take that time, and sometimes that meant I would write poems on the toilet or in the bath. And I think it's really important. We as people, we always want to deny ourselves the things that make us happiest if it means that we have spending time on ourselves. It took me getting smashed into by a car to take the time to myself to sit down and let myself create. And I think my best piece of advice would be, don't let a car smash into you before you make the time for yourself. It's not a bad thing to carve out even just 15 minutes a day. And I'm not going to sit here and preach the Molly May, everyone's 24 hours are the same, because they're not. But never ever feel guilty for taking that time.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Asking anyone else?
Thanks. Hello. As a fellow publisher, I was particularly interested in your boundary thing, which you didn't really, if I could dig a little deeper. I've been doing it for 5 years, and I've never managed to set those boundaries. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on those boundaries, really.
So I actually have a lot to thank Charlie and Alex Callahan for when it comes to setting boundaries. And I think we want to be available to people all the time. And I often make the mistake of thinking that me being available all the time means that I'm doing the best for people. And actually what I realised was, if I don't take that time out from the press to sit and think about things and process things, that my reactions are not always going to be the best reactions. And so I've had sometimes writers contacting me at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, and I felt the need to immediately respond to them, and it's never ended well. So I very much try and stick by the mantra, do not engage in conversation after 7 p.m. at night, because
That's
it's never going to end
advice.
well. So I think I have to be really, really clear on myself, and also accepting help. And that's something that these two have really, really helped me with, because I very often don't want to ask for help because I feel like I'm exploiting other people. But actually, if they want to help me and they want to give me that assistance, it's not bad for me to say, actually, yeah, I could really do with that. And what we've created has been really beautiful as a result of it. And it's really helped me kind of manage my workload. So I guess that's what I mean, really, is just don't answer messages at 11 o'clock on a Friday. It's never going to end well.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Did you go back to teaching? If not, why not? And if so, has it changed how you teach?
That's a really interesting one, actually. Thank you. So I wanted to, but at the time of the crash, I was UPS 3, which in teacher speak just means I was really expensive. And I was a former head of English. And at the time of coming back into teaching, I'd had 2 years of not being within the field. And I found it really hard to get a job. And so I did a little bit of tutoring. And then I kind of realised that I'd lost my passion for that and I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I did a stint in a primary school working behind the reception, which was really cool. Actually, I really enjoyed that, which was part-time. And that gave me the ability to focus on the press until I was ready to go back to work full-time. And so now I'm an education consultant and I work for a charity, a national charity, advocating for oracy and spoken word and communication and helping children become better communicators. And it's a really beautiful job, actually, because it means I can draw upon everything I've learned from working with spoken word poets and doing performances and things like this and bring it into my practice and my consultancy work. So it's been a really nice kind of, what's the word, serendipitous path, really, because I've managed to keep my foot in education. And one thing that I'm working on at the minute with Written Off is some educational resources for teachers where we utilise our writers to create poetry schemes of work that speak to the young people better than maybe what we were looking at when I was teaching. Because there are only so many Benjamin Zephaniah poems in the world. So, you know, it's been really nice to keep a foot in it that way.
Great idea, that.
Thank you.
I've got one from James back here, and then I'll come to Alex.
About this community that you have established, how can people contribute to that foundation and make it stronger if, say, for instance, money and distance is an issue?
So we've thought really hard about this in terms of having people, bringing them into the community. So we run a monthly open mic and we do it via Zoom. And the reason we do it via Zoom is so that it's accessible to everybody. And it's always on a pay-as-you-feel basis, so nobody's ever turned away for lack of funds. So that's our most regular event that we do. We do a lot of online book launches and we always encourage people to come along to those. And then because we are aware, we don't use Amazon to print, we don't use Amazon at all, so our books are more expensive than what they might be usually. So we are launching in the new year a Patreon where people can access PDF copies of our collections at a lower price point, alongside workshops that will be delivered online and things like that. So we do have a really strong online community as well. So a lot of the people who support us in our kind of Instagram circle, they often will come to those events. And we always say to people, we never encourage you to buy if you can't afford. We just love to have our stuff shared. So we love it when people share our posts and when people share our covers and when people share all of the work that we do. But if you are a writer and you are interested in contributing to anything that we do, today is actually the launch date of A Up 3, which is our collection of Northern poetry, edited by Alex Callaghan. And we do that annually, and it's exclusively for Northern writers and artists. So that's an opportunity for people to get involved as well. And it costs nothing to submit to us ever. So you're welcome.
Thank you for that.
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering, you've obviously overcome a lot to get where you are and do all the stuff you've done. But I was wondering, what is the thing you're most proud of?
Ooh, I think that's a really hard one. I think it's not one singular thing. There's not one singular, because we've done so much. Like, we went to Helsinki to do the Runoku Festival. We went to New York City to do the New York City Poetry Festival, which is unreal, and all of those things are great in themselves. But I think the thing I'm most proud of is that I now have a group of people in my phone that I have brought together that love each other very, very much, that lean on each other and support each other. So I know that I have people in that group that will come to me in crisis of some kind, and I can signpost them to somebody else who will support them. And to know that I've facilitated that and that that exists because of me being smashed into by a car, that is probably the thing I'm proudest of, because I feel like that could have been an awful, awful time for me that ended with me just being super depressed and then working in a menial job for the rest of my life, and it would have been fine. But to know that that's come out of it makes me very happy indeed.
Okay, so unless there are any burning questions, is it burning? Are you burning? Okay.
Yes, I wanted to come this afternoon because I've been in exactly the same position as you have. I also had an incredibly serious accident, which was very traumatic. I also turned to poetry. And my former life was shattered. I was a documentary maker, and I then had to kind of look at things in an entirely different way. One of the things that I experienced was both a sense of hypervigilance because I had PTSD, and also a sense of detachment, which I hope made me a better poet. But I don't know whether that's something you experienced and whether it was a process you also went through.
I think for me, definitely there was a process. I think it was a little bit different. I think I am very hypervigilant. I think on a scale of 1 to trusting, as Sarah Kay says, I'm very naive, or I was before this. And I, throughout the situation, maybe leaned on the wrong people because I was going through a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts. But within my poetry, I feel like sometimes I overshared a little bit. And it was a real battle I had with myself, was with the need to write down everything that I was feeling and whether to share it or not. My detachment, I think, was more to do around driving and stuff outside of poetry, whereas my poetry was where I really dug into it. And at one point I wasn't sharing it, but then people were coming to me and going, why aren't you sharing it? Like, I've been through something similar. And so it's a weird kind of tightrope to walk, where you feel this sense of responsibility to be like, I should share this because other people are seeing something in it. But then am I just telling the world, like, there's a poem in the book about peeing into a catheter, and I'm like, do people need to hear that? But then I'm like, actually, it's such a weird and unique event to experience that people have come to me and said, you know, it's really interesting because I've been in that position and no one ever talks about it. So I guess for me, it was definitely the other end of the spectrum. I wasn't so much detached, just swimming in it, and I had to really be selective about what I put out there, because some of it did get quite dark and heavy at one point. But it helped me come through the other side, I guess. So it was worth it in the end.
So thank you, everyone, for your questions. I'll pass back to Charlie.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got around 5 minutes left. I literally just had a few quick fire questions before we
that's
got off.
fine.
Really. You see 18-year-old Becky. What do you say to her?
Well, firstly, I would say, don't call me Becky.
Whoops, sorry.
But also, God, just don't stress so much over things you can't change. Like, I am so anxious about things that are completely and utterly irrelevant. Just don't. It's a waste of time.
You meet 30-year-old Becky.
Dump him now.
What is your favourite word?
Acquiesce.
What is your least favourite word?
Flannel.
Is your unforgivable writer's trait?
My unforgivable writer's trait. Oh, I use way too many semicolons. Way too many.
Your one-sentence advice to anybody or any writer?
Keep chasing the yes. People are always going to say no, but eventually someone will always say yes. Don't give up just because someone says no.
Would you rather write a poem with a betting pen or a mechadabra?
A betting pen. A mechadabra, it'd be massive.
Yeah. So your car was Toyota, right, that you crashed in?
It was.
Does this technically make you harder than metal?
Do you know, it's funny you should say that, because Anthony Schmerick, who's this amazing kind of rap/poet, spoken word artist, messaged me in the aftermath of the crash because my front door key that was in my pocket, it was bent almost in two. And Written Off was originally called Bent Key Publishing until Ben Shapiro existed and stole our name. But I have it tattooed on my arm, the key. And Anthony Schmerick messaged me when I posted a picture, and he went, mate, that's proper art, that. Like, that key is bent in two, and you are still here. And every time I feel rubbish about my life and I feel like I'm not going anywhere or things are really bad, I always remember that message, that, like, actually, that car got totaled, that key was broken, but I'm still here. It's pretty good, isn't it?
That's a great message to leave. Would you rather have a bestseller or a Pulitzer?
I'd rather have a Nobel.
Absolute snob. Finally, where can people buy copies of your work?
So we have our website, which is writtenoffpublishing.com, and you can find us on Instagram at writtenoffpublishing. We also are stocked in Waterstones and lots of independent bookshops. If you have an independent bookshop, please stock our books. They're amazing. They're 100% recyclable and recycled. Hopefully you'll never need to do that, but they're all plastic free, as is all of our packaging. We're very eco-conscious, and they also just look smashing. So there you go.
I think that's just about all we have time for. Have you any last comments before we head off?
No, just thank you, everybody, for taking the time to come and listen to me ramble on for 45 minutes. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll chat to you then.